This is Eddie Hearn, Matchroom Boxing. You are watching Sporting Icons. You don't need to be anywhere else.
Well, here in the UK, we seem to have thrown everything, including the kitchen sink, the substitutes bench, you name it, at Saul Canelo Alvarez, and we just can't get a win. We can't even get close to getting a win over Canelo Alvarez. I think it's time that us Brits close the curtains and stop being sacrificial lambs, to be honest with you, with Canelo Alvarez. But, I mean, Canelo, he has 7 wins over British fighters. British fighters have no wins over Canelo. But at the same time, Canelo, he does have more wins over Americans, more wins over Mexicans. But, of course, this is talking about British fighters. Canelo, he's got a loss to Mayweather, an American. He's got a draw to Triple G from Kazakhstan. I do feel that Triple G beat Canelo, especially the first time around. But anyway, that is what it is. So when it comes to the Brit of Canelo Alvarez, 7 wins, Matthew Hatton, Ryan Rhodes, Amir Khan, Liam Smith, Rocky Fielding, Callum Smith, and Billy Joe Saunders. So he's 7-0 against the Brits. What else can we do? Who else do we really have that could even give Canelo trouble? John Ryder, Chris Eubank Jr., Callum Johnson, Lyndon Arthur, Anthony Yard, Joshua Buatsi. Of course, I'm talking from middleweight up to light heavyweight. I mean, these 3 divisions seem to be the main divisions for Canelo. But could any of those beat Canelo Alvarez right now? You wouldn't favour any of them. You really wouldn't. I think with, say, Lyndon Arthur and, say, Joshua Buatsi, very, very early to tell. Very early to tell. I think at the minute, Anthony Yard, with what's happened so far, he seems to be a little bit derailed. Hopefully he gets back on track and starts getting some good wins and beating some of the top domestic guys. We'll have to wait and see. Callum Johnson, you would probably say with Callum Johnson, if anybody's actually going to drop Canelo, as in, so Canelo finds himself sitting on the canvas, it might well be Callum Johnson. Callum Johnson is a very, very heavy-handed fighter. But in order for Callum Johnson to do even well against Canelo, he's going to have a run of fights. Something that Callum Johnson doesn't really get. Through no fault of his own, through his circumstances in his private life, of course, through injuries, he doesn't seem to really get any kind of momentum. But for him to do well against Canelo, he's going to need some kind of momentum in all reality. Chris Eubank Jr., yeah, he's fast. He's got lightning fast hands and that as well. His foot speed, the combinations could certainly give Canelo Alvarez trouble. And he's got a very good chin as well. So maybe with Chris Eubank Jr., but again, you wouldn't favour him against Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez is only 30 years old, and he seems to be getting better. So are we ever going to have a Brit defeat Canelo Alvarez? Right now, you wouldn't put money that you couldn't afford to lose on it, would you? You really wouldn't. But if we were to look back over our history, not even like a real deep history, really, for our middleweights, our super middleweights, our light heavyweights, could any of those have defeated Canelo Alvarez? Could James DeGale have defeated Canelo Alvarez? In my opinion, no. I mean, with James DeGale, I supported James DeGale. Of course I did. I always wanted to see him do well and get the wins. But I do feel that he didn't carry enough power to trouble Canelo. His boxing skill, very, very good boxing skill for sure. And he could probably cause Canelo some frustrations in the early parts. But ultimately, James DeGale used to get hit quite a lot. And if you've got losses to George Groves, Chris Eubank Jr. and certainly Caleb Truax, I wouldn't hold too much hope for him getting a win over a Canelo Alvarez. A Canelo Alvarez of right now. We're not talking about Canelo Alvarez who lost to Floyd Mayweather when he was very, very young in his early 20s. No, we're talking about Canelo Alvarez right now, 30 years old, who seems to be improving. I mean, you've got James DeGale. His best wins are probably Andre Durrell, Lucian Bute maybe, a draw with Badu Jack, which in my opinion he was on his way to winning that fight. But when they're your best wins, it's not really a good look if you're going to be fighting a Canelo Alvarez. Nigel Benn, of course, I mean, he was one of my favourite fighters growing up. I thought Nigel Benn was an absolute warrior. His draw with Chris Eubank Jr., the rematch, I felt he won that fight. But I was very young to really know too much difference, but I felt that he won and got robbed to a draw. Win over Gerald McLennan. But again, with Nigel Benn, at least he would fight these guys. Nigel Benn would fight anybody and anybody with a pulse, wouldn't he? You know, Steve Collins he's been in there with, and the list goes on. But Nigel Benn, how would he get on against Canelo Alvarez? I think he'd do well for the first couple of rounds, but ultimately, I think that as the fight went on, I don't think that Nigel Benn's gas tank was ever really the best. Canelo's gas tank is very, very solid, and at some point we'll end up getting on top of Nigel Benn and just stopping him, to the point where Nigel Benn may end up having to have quit on his stool and not come out. In all factuality, or opinion at least, because I don't think that Nigel Benn will be able to hang with Canelo Alvarez. And I say that begrudgingly because if I could put him in a time machine and put him in there with Canelo, I'll be supporting Nigel Benn from the rafters. I really would. Other ones, Richie Wood. Nope. Just nope. Absolutely not. Richie Wood, he was a good fighter, but for me, he was a good domestic fighter. I know he did okay on the world scene, but no, I don't think that he would do very well against Canelo Alvarez. I think Canelo Alvarez would probably get him out of there in 3 rounds, maybe 4, maybe. Robin Reed? Absolutely not. I know he got a contentious loss to Joe Calzaghe, but he's lost to Carl Froch, Jeff Lacey. In fact, he's lost quite a few times, and you can't really pull out a great win for Robin Reed. I always liked Robin Reed, but I always felt that there's something missing from him. I always felt he's a good domestic fighter, but world level, no. In my opinion, absolutely not. So Robin Reed against Canelo Alvarez, absolutely not. I think that will only end one way, and that is Robin Reed face down, asleep. Again, I'll say that with a heavy heart. George Groves, again, no. I think George Groves had the ability to frustrate him and potentially even go the distance with Canelo Alvarez. But at the same time, what George Groves are we talking about? Are we talking about George Groves around the time when he was fighting, say, Carl Froch? Maybe. If we're talking about the George Groves who was fighting the likes of Badu Jack and whatever, you'd have to give it a heavy no. You really would. I know he's got a great win over, say, Fedor Chudinov, of course, when he won the WBA super middleweight world title. He does have a good win over Martin Murray and David Brophy and whatever. But losing to Callum Smith, again, a guy who Canelo has already beaten. I don't think that George Groves would beat Canelo Alvarez. Really, I don't, unfortunately. Maybe a Matthew Macklin? No, absolutely not. Matthew Macklin, he's a good fighter, and I do feel it is very, very contentious about him losing to Felix Sturm, but, you got a loss to Jamie Moore. Hey, listen, Jamie Moore was a good fighter, but losing to Triple G, no shame in that, no shame in losing to Martinez and that as well, but I just don't think Matthew Macklin could have hung with Canelo Alvarez for more than 2 or 3 rounds, if I'm being brutally honest, so no. Carl Froch, Carl Froch was a good super middleweight in a poor super middleweight era. Of course, he had Andre Ward and that in there, of course, and Mikkel Kessler. Again, 2 guys that he lost to. I know he got a rematch win over Mikkel Kessler, but with Carl Froch, he was a good fighter, but against Canelo Alvarez, absolutely not. I think Canelo Alvarez, with the way that he fights now and the way that Carl Froch would fight, especially in his prime, you've got Carl Froch, wins over Robin Reed. That is what it is. Lucian Bute and Arthur Abraham, come on. They were never that good. Very, very padded resumes himself. Andre Durrell, I never rated him. Jermaine Taylor was an okay win. Jean Pascal was a very good win, if we're being honest. And certainly the rematch with George Groves, I do feel the first fight with George Groves was stopped too early. I really do. I think the referee was very, very on Carl Froch's side. But Carl Froch would have done well, and I think that he would have probably hurt and given Canelo Alvarez a few marks on the face. But I think at some point Canelo Alvarez would have truly, truly tested the chin of Carl Froch. Probably broke his chin and cracked a few ribs along the way as well. Because when you look at Carl Froch, losing to Mikkel Kessler, there's no shame in losing to Mikkel Kessler, by the way. And the way that he got pretty much just outdone by Andre Ward. Andre Ward, Canelo, that would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? But Carl Froch, no. I would want him to win, of course, but would he win? No, I think that Carl Froch, I know we haven't really seen too much of Carl Froch getting badly hurt and on the verge of getting knocked out in his career, but I think against Canelo Alvarez, I think that he would actually find himself asleep, if we're being brutally honest about it, or at least in my opinion. Other ones, maybe a Clinton Woods. Clinton Woods, career light heavyweight, good puncher, very durable guy, that is for sure. I mean, again, Clinton Woods, I think that he was just in the wrong era. I mean, when you've got the likes of Antonio Tarver and Roy Jones Jr., what do you do? What can you do? But Clinton Woods, for what he had, he done absolutely fantastic. But again, I feel that Clinton Woods, as durable as what he was and as good as what he was, got hit way too much. And if you're a punching bag for someone like Canelo Alvarez, it's only going to be a matter of time before he chops that tree down. I mean, I would love to have seen the fight, and I'll be very, very heavily on the side of Clinton Woods. Of course I would, but I wouldn't give him too much chance against Canelo Alvarez at all. Chris Eubank Sr., Chris Eubank, or English, however it is yet you want to call him. Good wins, of course, over Nigel Benn. As I said before, I thought the rematch, he got a bit of a gift in that one with the draw. Win over Michael Watson, well, a couple of wins over Michael Watson. Unfortunate with the second one, that is for sure. But I think that with Chris Eubank, he was never the same fighter after Michael Watson. Pre-Michael Watson would have given Canelo all kinds of nightmares, especially early on, because he had that killer instinct. He had that arrogance. He had a very good chin. He had a very good engine in that as well. But again, with the fact that he used to get hit quite a lot, and he did rely on his chin in that at times, knowing full well, although he could get dropped, him getting stopped and put clean out, very, very unlikely. So him going into a Canelo Alvarez fight would be something that he would have probably favoured himself quite a lot. And you need confidence. You really need confidence to go up there against a Canelo Alvarez. But Chris Eubank, I think he would have lost on points, to be fair. And probably found himself on the deck once or twice in that fight. But I don't think Canelo would have knocked him out. But he would have certainly beaten him on points. Probably due to the knockdowns, if I'm being fair. But I mean, again, I always liked Chris Eubank. I really did. I mean, Nigel Benn was my favourite fighter over the two, but I think that Chris Eubank, okay, so he lost to Joe Calzaghe, he lost to Steve Collins and that as well. No shame in that whatsoever. But again, as I said, this was post Michael Watson. But anyway, I think Steve Collins, as I've just mentioned there, I think that Steve Collins, I mean, his two best wins in his career, I mean, maybe you guys will be able to correct me on this one, but for me, his best wins were the wins over Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn. But I felt that Steve Collins, his best years was when he retired, was like at the end of his career. I feel that Steve Collins had a lot more to give. I don't know why he kind of stopped doing it, to be honest with you. I really don't know. Maybe some of you can tell me why. But I thought that with Steve Collins, he was the kind of guy that would go into a gym and work on game plans. He would look and study his opponents, see their weaknesses, see their strengths. And that's what he would adopt on fight night. But him against Canelo Alvarez, again, I think that he would have just went for him. He would have just jumped all over Canelo. That's for sure. But I think Canelo would have got the better of him as the fight went on. Honestly, I do on that one. Michael Watson, very underrated fighter, by the way. I know it's very unfortunate with what happened with him and Chris Eubank. But Michael Watson, you know, is a guy who stopped Nigel Benn in, was it 6 rounds or something like that? I mean, again, he was a guy who would step up and he would try and fight those in and around him, like a Mike McCallum. Okay, come up short, and Chris Eubank, of course, he come up short devastatingly in round number 12 against Chris Eubank. Again, that was at super middleweight, because obviously you got Michael Watson as a career middleweight. But I think that he was beating Chris Eubank, and then unfortunate things happened. But Michael Watson against Canelo, again, he would give Canelo all kinds of problems. Not necessarily nightmares, but problems in the early parts of the fight. But I think Canelo, at some point, would have just got to him. Really, I do. Joe Calzaghe. Now, when we look at our British-Irish fighters, Joe Calzaghe is probably the one where you may look at and go, maybe he could beat a Canelo Alvarez. This is a Joe Calzaghe who went his entire career undefeated and with a decent resume. Yes, there's a lot of padding on it for sure, but you know, wins over Roy Jones Jr., Bernard Hopkins, Chris Eubank, Jeff Lacey, Sakio Bika, Mikkel Kessler as well, even Richie Wood and Robin Reed. I mean, I've said that before. It's a bit of a contentious one with Robin Reed, but still, he was a fantastic fighter, and the way that he would throw punches in bunches will give Canelo Alvarez all kinds of problems. You would see Canelo literally on the back foot for a lot of the fight. You really would. Joe Calzaghe is the kind of guy that would stand in front of you. Sure, he got chin checked a few times, as in he went down, but he always got back up and never seemed to get disheartened by any of it. It almost gave him the boost, like the kick of the backside to say, right, you need to start working a bit harder. And with his dad in the corner always berating him, I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Calzaghe, a prime Joe Calzaghe, of course, but at what point do you really call Joe Calzaghe prime? At what point in his career? Very difficult to work out, isn't it? But I think that Joe Calzaghe, I mean, he wouldn't be the favourite against Canelo, and it wouldn't surprise me if Canelo did actually knock out Joe Calzaghe. But I don't think Canelo would have beaten Calzaghe on points. I really don't. But if he did, it would have been because he knocked Calzaghe down to the canvas a couple of times. But either way, I mean, that's my thoughts. I don't think anybody really in the history of British boxing, I don't think anybody in the future could probably beat Canelo Alvarez. As I said before in the early part of the video, maybe close the curtains. Let's not be throwing our fighters as firewood onto the fire of Canelo Alvarez. Let some other people take some losses, right? Anyway, that's my thoughts. You drop me yours. Click thumbs up, subscribe. Catch you on the next video.